The Darwin Awards usually mean outrageous stunts, but today's cases are just completely pathetic decisions so foolish it's hard to believe anyone actually thought they'd survive. From a warehouse worker who swapped a home-cooked steak for a $5 snack, to a salesman who watched an online tutorial shortcut to cut down a tree, ending it in the worst way possible. It was October 14th, 2014, just after 2 a.m. in Columbus, Ohio. The warehouse on the edge of town hummed with conveyor belts and buzzing fluorescent lights. It was just another ordinary night shift. It was lunchtime when 34-year-old Darnell Johnson Okafor headed to the break room. His wife had packed him a lunch of steak and vegetables before he left for work, but the steak was cooked medium rare. Darnell preferred his steak well done. Based on my research, once Darnell decided something wasn't the way it should be, it was almost impossible to change his mind. Rather than eat the lunch his wife had prepared, he tossed it back into the fridge and decided he'd just grab a bag of chips and a soda from the vending machine instead. He put a $5 bill into the old vending machine and punched the buttons for a bag of chips. However, the machine only whirred, groaned, and kept his money, delivering nothing. He tried again, but still nothing happened. A coworker standing nearby laughed, pulled out his phone, and started recording, expecting Darnell to give the machine a quick, frustrated shove just to vent. Darnell gripped the metal frame with both hands. Another worker pointed at the bright warning decal stuck to the front, "Do not rock or tip machine," and shouted at him to stop. Darnell brushed the warning off, muttering that the sticker was just there to scare people so the company couldn't be sued for a few dollars. He pulled harder, throwing his weight into it. The heavy machine's base shifted, and the center of gravity gave out. This is the moment that makes my stomach turn. Several hundred pounds of dense steel, thick glass, and heavy inventory tipped forward. It happened with terrifying speed. As the machine toppled, Darnell tried to jump back, but the top edge caught him. It landed on his chest before he could move, pinning him flat against the cold tile floor with a sickening, heavy thud that echoed through the warehouse. They called emergency services while trying to keep Darnell talking. His voice got thinner and shallower with every breath as his chest was compressed. Firefighters arrived 9 minutes later with heavy hydraulic equipment. Once they finally pried the machine away, paramedics found Darnell in cardiac arrest. They started cardiopulmonary resuscitation right there on the break room floor and kept going in the ambulance, but he was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. The medical examiner ruled it an accident caused by the immense weight of the machine crushing his chest and stopping him from breathing. Investigators checked the machine later. It hadn't tipped on its own. It only fell because it had been rocked with enough force to pass its balance point. The warehouse bolted every machine to the floor after that. Management added the incident to their safety training as a blunt lesson: never shake a machine. Personally, this story is a brutal, simple lesson, and it's truly sad that it took losing a life just for a snack wasn't worth the risk. His coworkers couldn't understand how a decision to skip his packed lunch for a $5 snack ended that way, especially once they realized maintenance could have refunded the money in just a few minutes if someone had called. His wife later said the hardest part was bringing home the untouched lunch she had packed for him that morning, knowing he never got the chance to eat it. It's crazy how something as small as a $5 snack can end a life. But the next story reminds me that it doesn't always take anger or frustration. Sometimes all it takes is trying to impress the people around you. It was July 4th, 2015, in Fort Worth, Texas. The air was thick with the smoke of backyard grills, the sound of music, and the typical, relaxed vibe of an Independence Day barbecue. Randy Morales, a 27-year-old Filipino-American, was exactly where you'd expect him to be, right in the middle of the party. And if you knew Randy, you knew he had one major personality trait. He absolutely could not turn down a dare. Whether it was ridiculously hot wings, a bet on a football game, or something completely ridiculous at a cookout, he had to be the guy who came out on top. I think we all know that one person who just can't let a challenge slide, but that kind of stubbornness usually comes with a pretty heavy price tag. It's like they feel they have something to prove, even when there's absolutely nothing on the line. That afternoon, the party was winding down, and someone pulled out a ghost pepper. It was a classic tough guy bet, $20 if he could eat the whole thing. Naturally, a few people pulled out their phones to record. Randy didn't hesitate. He took the bet immediately, shoved the pepper in his mouth, and chewed. Within seconds, the reality of that heat hit him. His face turned bright red. He started coughing, and his eyes watered. He began stumbling backward, gasping, and trying to catch his breath. It was a chaotic scene, but to the people watching, it was hilarious. His friends were standing just a few feet away, laughing and cheering, completely convinced he was just playing it up for the camera. And what I found haunting while searching this story was how everyone laughing, thinking it's all just a big joke, while Randy is actually in real, life-threatening trouble. The fact that he was suffering right there in plain sight and everyone around them was totally oblivious, it just makes my skin crawl. Randy didn't realize he was blindly staggering backward toward a small, shallow plastic kiddie pool that had been set up on the hard concrete patio for the younger children. Still coughing and trying to catch his breath, his heel caught the edge of the hard plastic rim. He lost his balance and fell backward. The back of his head struck the concrete before he landed face down in the few inches of water. The impact knocked him unconscious instantly. People kept laughing for a few more seconds, still convinced Randy was acting, but when he didn't move, they rushed over and pulled him from the water. He wasn't breathing. They immediately started CPR and called 911. Paramedics managed to restore a pulse before rushing him to the hospital, but he had gone too long without oxygen. 2 days later, doctors confirmed he had suffered a severe, irreversible brain injury from the fall and drowning, and Randy passed away. The medical examiner later ruled his death an accident. The fatal brain injury resulted from the head impact, followed by the lack of oxygen after he landed face down in the water. Investigators found no evidence of criminal wrongdoing, and no one at the party faced charges. It completely devastated everyone there. Dozens of people had been standing just a few feet away, yet no one realized how serious the situation was until it was too late. Later, his family worked with local water safety groups to spread a simple message. You don't need a deep pool to drown. If you're unconscious, even a few inches of water is enough. And those friends who were there? They deleted that video. They couldn't even look at it anymore, knowing that the footage they thought was just a funny party video was actually the final few seconds of someone's life. Now, this next story is different. Nobody was cheering anyone on. It was just one man convincing himself he was fine when he really wasn't. It was December 10th, 2016, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It was a standard chilly Saturday afternoon, the kind where most people were busy with holiday chores, getting the house ready for the season. Gary James Petrosky was 52. He was a recently retired postal worker who loved taking on DIY projects. I personally think we've all known someone like Gary in our lives. That guy who's convinced he doesn't need a contractor, a manual, or any outside help to get a job done. He really took pride in his independence, even if his family did tease him about his obsession with those as seen on TV gadgets that promised to make every chore easier. That day, he was determined to hang lights on his 2-story home. He had just bought a new folding stepladder, but he skipped reading the manual and just set it up how he thought it worked. Even though there were clear warning labels printed right on the frame telling users not to stand on the top steps, he climbed up near the peak to reach the roof line. He was reaching way out to the side to clip the lights to the gutter. Suddenly, the ladder shifted. It didn't just wiggle, it kicked out from underneath him. He fell, tumbling through the air before slamming into the hard concrete driveway. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and he lay there for a moment, stunned. It's painful to think about, but how many of us have hit the ground and just tried to shake it off, telling ourselves we're tougher than we actually are? His wife was right there and immediately begged him to go to the emergency room, but he was convinced he had just bruised his ribs. He went inside, took some pain relievers, and rested for an hour. But here's the thing about being stubborn. It's really hard to just walk away from an unfinished project. He sat in his chair, frustrated, staring at the half-done string of lights out the window. Despite his wife's objections, he went back out. He climbed that same ladder again, standing higher than he should have been. As he leaned out to finish the last section, he put too much weight on the outer edge. The metal feet skidded on the smooth concrete. The ladder swung out, and he lost his balance completely. This time, he didn't have a chance to brace himself. He fell head first, hitting the concrete with a sickening thud. His wife called emergency services immediately, but by the time paramedics arrived, Gary was unresponsive. They rushed him to a trauma center, but the scans showed his cervical spine was shattered. It is absolutely devastating to realize that he had already fractured a rib in that first fall. He was already hurt, but he just couldn't let it go. He passed away that evening. The medical examiner ruled it an accidental death. Investigators later confirmed there was nothing wrong with the ladder itself. It simply tipped because he was overreaching and standing too high. The local fire department later started using Gary's story for their safety training. His wife later said the hardest part was knowing the lights really could have just waited for another day. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you're hurt and walk away from the ladder. Nothing is worth losing your life over a few holiday decorations. I think we've all looked at an unfinished job and thought, I'll just finish it real quick. That's exactly why the next story hit so hard. Because this time, impatience around a backyard grill turned an ordinary holiday into a tragedy. It was September 4th, 2017, in Marietta, Georgia. It was one of those classic, warm Labor Day afternoons. 80-something degrees, a light breeze, and the smell of neighbors cooking out, drifting over the fences. You know the vibe. It was supposed to be a relaxing, perfect holiday. It was the kind of day when the biggest worry should have been whether the potato salad had enough mayo or if the team was going to win the game on the television inside. Chuck Daniel Reyes, who was 41, was hosting his annual neighborhood cookout. He ran his own pool cleaning business and was known for being the kind of guy who would show up to fix a neighbor's filter for free just because it was the right thing to do. He was the guy you wanted in your corner. Honestly, it's always the good, reliable people who seem to end up in these situations, which just makes it even harder to hear. Chuck loved cooking for his family, but he had a real competitive streak when it came to his ribs. His brother-in-law was always teasing him about taking them off the grill too early, and Chuck was determined to prove him wrong and absolutely nail it this time. By late afternoon, the backyard was packed. People were laughing, cold drinks were in hand, and the atmosphere was light. Chuck had his propane grill going, but he was feeling restless. He kept popping the lid, checking the heat, clearly convinced it wasn't getting hot enough or fast enough for his standards. His brother-in-law kept telling him to just leave it shut, let the grill do its job and stop hovering. But Chuck wasn't having it. He was focused on that perfect sear. In his rush, he spotted an old bottle of charcoal lighter fluid sitting on a shelf, a leftover relic from a camping trip months ago. I don't know why, but we've all done that thing where we see an object and our brain completely skips the, is this actually a good idea part. We just act. He convinced himself that a quick splash would be the secret weapon to boost the heat and get those ribs finished. Nobody in the yard actually believed he would go through with it. But right there, in front of everyone, he opened the bottle, lifted the heavy lid of the propane grill, and leaned over the active flames. The moment he squeezed the bottle, everything changed. The lighter fluid hit the hot grill and instantly flared into a massive flash fire. The sudden burst of flames engulfed his hand in the bottle, causing him to jerk backward in panic. It happened in a terrifying instant. Startled by the sudden fireball, Chuck jerked backward in panic, squeezing the bottle and splashing burning lighter fluid across his chest and arms. The bottle dropped from his hand, and the burning liquid splashed across the concrete patio. Within seconds, his clothes were engulfed. It was pure frantic chaos. His brother-in-law lunged forward and tackled him to the ground and tried to smother the flames. Someone else grabbed a nearby garden hose, and others scrambled to throw heavy towels over him. It was a frantic, desperate scene, with everyone acting on pure adrenaline. The ambulance arrived about 8 minutes later. Chuck was conscious but badly burned. He had inhaled superheated gases, and the burns on his chest, arms, and face were severe. He was flown to a specialized burn center in Atlanta, where he underwent multiple surgeries. Despite a week of treatment, his injuries were too severe, and he passed away. It's just a gut-wrenching reminder of how quickly normal can disappear. One impulsive choice, one lapse in judgment, and a family is changed forever. The investigation was straightforward. It was an accident. Investigators confirmed the lighter fluid ignited almost instantly when it hit the hot grill, creating the flash fire that burned Chuck. There was no foul play, just a horrible tragedy born of impatience. Afterward, his family went through their home and cleared out every single drop of lighter fluid they could find. It's a brutal reminder. Propane grills are not charcoal grills. No amount of impatience is worth risking a tragedy like this. Just wait for the grill to heat up. It's never worth the risk, and it's a lesson that shouldn't have to be learned this way. Chuck only wanted dinner ready a little faster. The next man was trying to save time too, but the shortcut he took was far more dangerous than he realized. It was February 19th, 2013, in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was a cold afternoon, the kind where you can still see the light snow from earlier that morning. Things were quiet. Most people were at work, and the streets were just about empty, save for a few plows moving through. It looked like any other boring winter weekday. Living on that block was Walter James Grimes. He was 58, and he made his living as a landlord, owning 6 rental properties in the area. Before he did that, he'd spent years in maintenance. He knew his way around drywall, plumbing, and electrical work. Over time, he'd actually convinced himself there wasn't a problem in a house that he couldn't fix himself. His tenants knew him as the guy who always showed up with a worn toolbox in the back of his truck. He took pride in fixing things himself instead of hiring a contractor. It had saved him thousands of dollars over the years. And honestly, that track record just reinforced his belief that real-world experience trumped actual certification. But that attitude was about to hit a wall. One of his tenants had been calling him for a week, complaining about a faint smell of natural gas in the kitchen. It wasn't overwhelming, but it kept coming back. Walter had been busy working on another property across town, so he kept putting her off. By early afternoon, he finally showed up. He told the tenant to go wait out on the sidewalk while he went inside to check the stove and the gas connections. He was sure it was just a slow leak he could pin down in a few minutes. I get why he wanted to save time, but ignoring a gas leak? That's not just stubborn. It's a gamble you simply cannot win. Instead of clearing the house and calling the gas company, he decided to investigate on his own. He figured if it were actually dangerous, the smell would have been way stronger when he walked in. So, he didn't open any windows. He just reached into his pocket, pulled out a wooden match, and struck it to check the area around the stove. The second that match flared, the kitchen exploded. The gas that had built up in the house ignited instantly. The blast was powerful enough to blow out the front windows and rip the cabinets right off the walls. The force threw Walter backward, and the ceiling started collapsing on top of him. It was pure chaos, burning insulation, glass and wood everywhere, with fire tearing through the house. Neighbors heard the blast and rushed outside. A security camera across the street caught the flash through the windows before smoke started pouring from the roof. The tenant, who had been waiting safely outside, immediately called 911. Firefighters pulled Walter from the wreckage and rushed him to a nearby trauma center. He had suffered extensive burns and severe internal injuries from the explosion. Despite hours of emergency treatment to stabilize him, his condition continued to deteriorate, and he died later that evening. The investigation was straightforward. It was an accident. Investigators found that a slow leak had allowed gas to build up over several days. They confirmed the tenant had reported it, and they confirmed the match was the ignition source. It's a brutal, sobering reality check. No handyman fix is worth your life. If you smell gas, leave the house and call the professionals. Period. The house was so badly damaged it had to be torn down. The tenant eventually reached a settlement with the insurance company, but she told investigators something that stuck with me. She said she never ignored the smell of gas again, no matter how minor it seemed. I hope we can all say the same. What gets me about Walter's story is that he'd fixed so many things before that he stopped believing anything could really go wrong. That same kind of confidence shows up again in the next story, only this time it involved a ladder instead of gas. It was October 18th, 2014, in Peoria, Illinois. The morning was cool, around 58 degrees, with clear skies and almost no wind. The overnight dew had long since dried, leaving driveways and sidewalks completely dry. Across the neighborhood, homeowners were outside taking advantage of the comfortable weather to finish weekend chores before the afternoon. Then there was 42-year-old Gary Wendell Huckabee, A man who built his entire identity around the idea that he could figure anything out. He was the kind of person who walked into a hardware store and felt offended by the pre-made solutions in the aisles, preferring to believe that he had a unique, unconventional insight into how things worked. Gary had a gutter problem, and his perfectly functional extension ladder was sitting right there in the shed. The only issue was that the shed had been locked since March, and the key had gone missing. Now, a normal person would have spent a few minutes looking for a spare key, walked to the hardware store for a new lock, or simply asked a neighbor for help. But not Gary. He just stared at the shed, looked up at his gutters, and decided he didn't need a ladder, he just needed height, and he figured he already had plenty of height-adjacent objects lying around the yard. His neighbor, who was out watering his lawn, watched in disbelief as Gary dragged a plastic patio chair, a large cooler, and a second, smaller cooler into the driveway. He began stacking them against the side of the house like a man building a monument to his own hubris. The neighbor tried to intervene, suggesting that Gary just buy a gutter pole for $30 at the nearby hardware store, but Gary, already halfway up his makeshift tower, brushed the advice aside, insisting he knew exactly what he was doing. In truth, he had never done anything like this before. His only previous experience with elevation was climbing a standard ladder once to hang Christmas lights, but apparently, this single memory had been enough to convince him that he possessed a general expertise in the physics of climbing. The tower, consisting of a chair, a cooler, and a smaller cooler, swayed gently in a light breeze. Gary, standing on the smaller cooler in his socks to avoid dirtying the lid, reached for a clump of wet leaves. They were 6 inches beyond his reach, which meant they were also 6 inches beyond the structural limits of a lawn chair balanced on curved plastic. The cooler lid, which was never designed to bear human weight, gave a soft groan of protest and folded inward. Gary's foot went through it up to the ankle. As his weight shifted, the chair lost its tenuous grip on the concrete, and the entire structure collapsed sideways. Gary fell off the tower, plummeted from the side of the house, and landed directly onto the patio below. The neighbor ran over to find Gary on the ground, unresponsive, with his socks still trapped in the broken cooler lid. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but despite their best efforts at the hospital, Gary succumbed to a severe head injury later that day. The investigation was simple. The medical examiner ruled the death as blunt force trauma from an accidental fall, and the report noted, almost parenthetically, that a perfectly functional extension ladder had been locked in the shed just 15 feet away. Afterward, Gary's neighbor, who had been ignored when he offered a simple, safe solution, bought a spare shed key and taped it inside his own garage just in case anyone else in the neighborhood ever decided to reinvent the definition of resourceful. Gary did not fall because of gravity, or even because of the gutters. He lost his life to a locked door he could have bypassed in minutes, and a hardware store 10 minutes away that he simply refused to visit. Now, the last story reminds me of something I think we've all been guilty of at least once. Watching a quick video online and convincing ourselves we're ready for a job that really takes years of experience. It was May 18th, 2013, in a quiet suburb outside Tampa, Florida. The afternoon was warm, mid-80s, with barely a breeze, the kind of day made for sitting on a porch, not what was about to happen in the backyard. 38-year-old Denny Michael Ashworth was the guy everyone knew. Not because he was particularly skilled at anything, but because he was supremely, unshakably confident about everything. He'd sold cars for years, and if you know anything about car salesmen, you know confidence was never his problem. His brother used to joke that Denny could talk his way into a job he had zero business doing, and that Saturday, that's exactly what happened. There was a leaning oak tree in the backyard, the one that had been slowly tilting toward the house for 2 summers. Denny frequently boasted at family gatherings that he would take care of the tree himself. His entire argument rested on the belief that he could easily do for free what a professional would charge to handle. However, based on the accident report, nobody actually had ever seen Denny operate a chainsaw. Denny borrowed a chainsaw from a neighbor and spent barely a minute and a half watching a few online videos about cutting down leaning trees. By the time he slipped the phone back into his pocket, he had already convinced himself he knew enough to handle the job. His brother-in-law studied the tree, noticed the way it leaned toward the patio and how the light wind was pushing in the same direction, and urged him to stop. He suggested hiring an arborist, or At the very least, using a proper directional notch and a pull rope to bring the tree down safely. Denny dismissed the advice without much thought. Once he believed he had figured something out, it was almost impossible to change his mind. He made the first cut low on the trunk, at an angle that didn't resemble a proper directional notch. It looked more like he was trusting his instincts than following any actual plan. No rope, no wedge. No one positioned to watch the top of the tree or warn him if it started falling somewhere unexpected. I think that's where confidence quietly turns into overconfidence. The moment you believe you've got everything under control is usually the moment you stop looking for what could go wrong. He's standing there with a chainsaw buzzing in his hands, convinced he knows exactly what he's doing. He never considers the tree might not fall where he expects. The trunk cracked earlier than expected, and the tree did exactly what it had been threatening to do for 2 years. It didn't fall away from the house. It came straight down, in the same direction Denny happened to be standing, because nobody had bothered to establish an escape path, since nobody had planned on needing one. Denny looked up and took a step back, but it wasn't enough. The tree struck his shoulder and back, driving him to the ground. Family rushed over, finding him conscious but pinned and unable to feel his legs. A relative called 911 while others carefully cleared smaller branches without moving him. Paramedics arrived in about 11 minutes, working around downed branches to get to him. Denny was breathing, alert, and terrified. At the trauma center, they found a severe spinal injury along with internal bleeding from the impact. Surgeons worked through the night, but the damage was extensive. He passed away the following morning, with his family in the waiting room still holding out hope. It's brutal. The medical examiner ruled it an accident caused by blunt force trauma from the falling tree. A poorly planned cut and one wrong position cost Denny his life. The following weekend, that same leaning oak, or what was left of it, was finally cleared away, this time by a licensed crew with ropes, a spotter, and a plan. Denny's family had a small plaque installed near the stump and swore that from then on, anything involving a chainsaw, a ladder, or the words, "I got it," would be handled by someone who actually knew what they were doing. We spend so much time looking for the big dangers, we often miss the moments where overconfidence quietly writes the whole story before the first cut is even made. Stay safe out there, friends.